Hey, Al Scott Horton here for The Future of Freedom, the monthly journal of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Edited by libertarian purist Sheldon Richman, The Future of Freedom brings you the best of our movement, featuring articles by Richman, Jacob Hornberger, James Bovard, and many more. The Future of Freedom stands for peace and liberty, and against our criminal world empire and Leviathan state. Subscribe today. It's just $25 per year for the back pocket-sized print edition, $15 per year to read it online. That's The Future of Freedom at fff.org/subscribe. Peace and freedom. Thank you. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. On the line, I got Matthew Ho. He is a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy and is the former director of the Afghanistan Study Group, a network of foreign and public policy experts and professionals advocating for a change in U.S. strategy in Afghanistan. He was a Marine in Iraq and then a State Department weenie in Afghanistan, and now he's writing for the Huffington Post. Welcome back to the show, Matthew. How are you doing?
Good, Scott. How are you doing?
I'm doing real good. Well, let me make sure I got you up loud enough here. Yeah, it should be fine. Hey, so very interesting article here. It seems like when you write stuff, you're writing stuff that other people, they're not really looking at what you're looking at, but I am. And you're making a very important point here, at least to start. It's a great place to start this conversation, and that is the war crimes of the good guys in the Iraq War, the side that America is taking once again, the side of the Iranian-backed Shiite militias.
Correct. And that's, I think, something that everyone needs to understand with this conflict in Iraq, but this pertains to many, many other conflicts, probably 99% of conflicts, that there are no good guys, that there are two sides or multiple sides who are fighting for the benefit of a few, either for financial or territorial or just strictly power reasons, or maybe for ideological or religious reasons, but that there are rarely ever a good side. Rarely ever is there a side who are wearing white hats. And you see that very clearly in the conflicts in Syria and Iraq, that what is motivating most of the people to fight, whether they're fighting on behalf of the Islamic State, whether they're fighting on behalf of Sunni tribes, whether they're fighting on behalf of the Kurdish forces or on Bashar Assad's forces, on the Iraqi government's forces, is to protect their own population, their own people from the other side. And that's what makes these civil wars so particularly nasty, and that why this cycle of violence is so easy to spin out of control and create Frankensteins like you see with the Islamic State, because, like I said, there are no good guys. And when there are no good guys, everybody is fighting to protect themselves. And this report from Amnesty International that came out earlier this month, clearly shows that as bad as the Islamic State is, in many ways, the Iraqi government is just as bad.
Yeah, I think, and this has been part of a problem of the whole war, is that they've never, well, nowadays they talk a little bit about the factions on TV, but they've got no background, because in the whole Second Iraq War, they never stopped and said, here's the Dawa Party, here's the Supreme Islamic Council, here's Muqtada al-Sadr, and here are the different Sunni factions, and here are the different Kurdish factions, and, why are they fighting, and any of these things. They never explained all that. They always just, it's us and the Iraqi people versus the terrorists, and whatever crap. They never really explained what the hell is the Badr Brigade anyway. And so now they're kind of starting fresh, but without the history. And of course, for anybody who was paying attention, and you had to pay close attention then, or I guess lived through it like you did, who knows who the Badr Brigade are, they know that they don't have any more claim on moral legitimacy than ISIS. And that's in the middle of ISIS machine gunning their prisoners to death and crucifying them upside down and enslaving and raping and killing women and children. Badr Brigade are no better men than them.
Exactly. And that is what needs to be understood, what has to be understood if we're going to prevent future conflicts. I get discouraged with these conflicts because I think once the fighting has been joined, once the cycle of violence has began, it has to peter out on its own. And of course, accelerants can occur, such as outside powers or outside forces getting involved and providing money and weapons or training or encouragement or legitimacy, as we often do, or starting in the first place, as we often do. But the key to understanding this, and preventing future conflicts, is understanding that there are no good guys in these situations, and that's the average people who are being hurt, who are being destroyed, who are suffering from other groups, and that it cuts across all these groups. So it is just one broad swath of suffering with these various groups leading the fighting that have no moral legitimacy, have no reason for their actions, other for their own personal gain.
Mm. So, yeah, I was going to say, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's just a point of agreement with you. Michael Shia, the former chief of the CIA's bin Laden unit, I mean, I talked with him all about this, but most notably, I think, was what he told Lou Dobbs on Fox News when Lou Dobbs said, well, geez, so what are you saying? Because he was talking about the absurdity of backing the rebels in Syria. And Lou Dobbs said, well, so should we back Assad? And Shia is the type who is very much for killing the enemy. He's not squeamish about that whatsoever. Very kind of conservative nationalist on those grounds. And so purely for pragmatic reasons, he said, no, we should not back Assad. We should have never backed the rebels against him, which was insanity. But to back him is just as bad, basically, because then you're outright allying with their sectarian enemies in a way that just reinforces their position better and makes them makes their propaganda that they're the defenders of the true faith from all these different apostates aligned with the Christians from across the sea, which only makes them more powerful.
Absolutely. And you got to put yourself. I saw CNN had a photo today of a grieving Kurdish mother in northern Syria. And the photo was of her son, who looked like he was probably in his early 20s, who had been killed a couple months ago in the fighting. And any one of us who, both you and I, Scott, if we lived in northern Syria, would be fighting ISIS. Just in the same vein, if we were living in the Sunni parts of Iraq or the Sunni parts of Syria, would more than likely maybe not be a part per se of the Islamic State, but we would be supportive of them to a certain extent because that's in the interests of our own survival and the survival of our families. And that's what I think, again, that the point that people have to grasp here is this desperation that fuels this cycle of violence, and how, as you just commented with and Michael Shia is a great example, because as you said, he's not squeamish about killing people. It's not a question of being tough or being able to kill. It's a question of being smart about it and understanding what is the causes of these conflicts and why does the conflict keep growing? Why does it keep building? Why does it keep spiraling? And when you understand that, it's because these are civil wars that are pitting one ethnicity or sect against the other, and basically threatening each other with annihilation. Well, then how does it not escalate? If the Islamic State is approaching your Kurdish village, how do the Kurds not fight? And how does the Sunnis not support the Islamic State when Shia troops are moving on their village? And then you get into retribution of it, right? So you sacked, you burned, you raped my people. I'm going to do the same to you.
Let me ask you this. Now, Matthew, do you think that Obama and them believe their own hype when they talk about, well, we've got to help the Iraqis fight these guys? I mean, I fear a lot of times they believe their own propaganda, their own oversimplifications, that they don't even want to admit the sectarian nature really of the fight in their plan. That they just sort of look at ISIS like it's this alien force that came, from outer space or from over some border somewhere, never mind, and grafted itself on when they had to have the agreement of a great many Sunnis, as you're describing. And, of course, I can't let you answer now because the music's playing and we got to go to break. But we'll be right back with Matthew Ho in just a sec, y'all.
So you're a libertarian, and you don't believe the propaganda about government awesomeness you were subjected to in 4th grade. You want real history and economics. Well, learn in your car from professors you can trust with Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. And if you join through the Liberty Classroom link at scotthorton.org, we'll make a donation to support The Scott Horton Show. Liberty Classroom, the history and economics they didn't teach you.
All right, you guys, welcome back. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. I'm talking with Matthew Ho, and former Marine and State Department and critic of Iraq and Afghan war policy, a writer at HuffingtonPost.com. The latest is, with America's help, Iraq's cycle of violence spirals. So a couple of references now, the last war and this one, to the narrative as told by the state and for the most part the media, Matthew, about how, yeah, it's us and the people of Iraq versus the bad guy terrorists who are doing the bad things that make us have to fight them. And I would guess that a lot of the bad decisions made in the last war were based because they at least had to pretend to believe that while they were doing some of the horrible things that they did, like hiring the Badr Brigade and the El Salvador option to create the damn civil war in the first place. But then I hear them talking about the situation in Iraq that way now, as though the Islamic State doesn't really exist, as though Sunnistan has not really declared independence, as though Baghdad is still really the capital of all of Iraq, and this is just a short-term aberration, and it's still us and the Iraqis versus the terrorists, and not much further identification for, what they're about than that. So anyway, what do you think about that? And I'm sorry I'm asking you to describe what you think they think, but I really wonder what you think they think they're doing over there.
I really do believe with the Bush administration in 2003 that they really thought they were going to change the Middle East, that they really thought that they were going to make these pliant, Western-friendly democracies that were going to follow their lead, and they really thought that they really believed in themselves and their power to change history and their power to change peoples. With this administration, I think it's much more cynical. I think some of them do believe, because when you lie continuously, ultimately you believe the lies. Some of it I think is just naive. Some of it is just straight political necessity. It's better for a black Democrat to be tough and bomb people than to face the political suggestion that he's not tough or that he's weak. And then, frankly, a lot of it is they just don't know what they're doing. They're receiving bad advice. They're taking advice from people who are either profiting from the wars, in this case of, say, think tanks that are funded by the defense industry, or from people who have been involved in these campaigns from the start and who cannot split themselves, their personal legacy and their careers from the actual policies. So I think it's a mix of things, but none of it is quite any good. And I think when you speak to these people in Washington in both administrations, particularly say in the National Security Council, their lack of understanding, their lack of appreciation for what life is really like in the midst of those wars, for who is actually on the different sides, for what our quote unquote allies are actually like, who actually comprises our enemies, is often turned upside down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a huge part of this is, the anti-Assad politics of the Israel lobby, and for that matter, the Israeli state and the Saudi one too, and all of that pressure, when at least, like Scheuer was saying, at least, stopping financing and supporting his opponents would make sense, allow him to go ahead and fight, but it's domestic politics that dictates an completely wrong-headed strategy for what's actually going on over there.
And the refusal to acknowledge a mistake. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you cannot acknowledge any mistake. You cannot, and this goes, I'm a big, one of the most important books I've ever read was David Halberstam's The Best and the Brightest. And that describes the Kennedy and the Johnson administrations, continual buildup in Vietnam and decision making involved in that, as well as Bill Moyer's wrote an excellent piece about 5 years ago on his own personal view of Johnson making that decision to escalate the war in Vietnam. And you see, just as now, his choices were bound in by domestic political concerns. He has to go fight the Vietnamese. He has to go fight the communists. He has to fight the Reds, or else how can he stare down these senators who are going to go after him? And the same thing too, I think, with the Obama administration, you see the same thing. If we don't bomb, then we're going to have John McCain and Lindsey Graham on Sunday morning television shows coming after us. And I think that has as much of a calculus and as much of a determinant in making the policy as does anything else. But again, there are a lot of things involved in these policies. You can't not acknowledge the fact that we didn't really care too much about the Islamic State beheading people until they started to threaten the Kurdish oil fields. I mean, so there's a lot of things that go into this as well, besides just the domestic politics. It's just that at that senior level, at the level of the chief executive, the domestic politics trumps everything. And then, of course, when he's looking for an explanation or a reason to do something, there are all types of people who have purposes and desires and who will benefit from from the war policies, who he can turn to give him strategy and give him reasons and give him excuses.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's certainly interesting to see the competing interests between something must be done here when you have more or less a bin Laden incarnate there claiming autocracy or whatever from the balcony in Mosul like that, and all the pressure to undo that for a regime change in Mosul as fast as possible. You can't let this guy continue to call himself Caliph Ibrahim and all his crap for any kind of long period of time. On the other hand, they really recognize that the American people, they really don't care about that ultimately, and they are really against sending troops back over there to undo it. And so, I don't know how they're going to handle this. I'm sure it'll get much worse after the midterm elections are over here in a little while. But those are some pretty severe competing interests when Baghdadi is 10 times what they ever accused Saddam of being falsely. And yet the American people's answer is, yeah, we already let you go invade Iraq to get rid of the terrorists, and we're not going to let you do that again. Send drones maybe, but not our boys.
Yeah, it is. It's the government squandered whatever trust the public had in them to commit American troops by going after Saddam Hussein. And then to make it even more of a tragedy, that failure resulted in Baghdadi, right? That failure resulted in the Islamic State. And I think that is the lesson that we must continue to take from this, is that our meddling overseas, our intervention, our trying to play Risk with real live dictators and real live countries fails. And when it fails, you get Frankensteins like the Islamic State. And so that's really what is the lesson of this. And there may not be a lot we can do in Iraq or Syria besides making it worse. So the thing we must look at then is, how do we prevent ourselves from creating these Frankensteins again, from unleashing these types of forces, this dynamic, these cycles of violence?
Yeah. Well, now, try to say it quickly. My thumbnail assessment here is that the Islamic State is surrounded by enemies. They're landlocked. They only have black market trading partners. They'll never have open diplomatic relationship with any of the neighboring states. America can surely prevent anything like that from taking place. And, of course, these guys are such horrible bastards in the way that they operate. And we've seen how the Iraqi people treat their kind. Seen them in the past. They were driven to ally with Al-Qaeda in Iraq out of desperation back in 05 and 06 and 07, and then they turned on them and said, actually, this is our land, not yours, and screw you. Now, I know Baghdadi and his top people mostly are Iraqis, but still, that's not typically their system. It hasn't been for a long time. to live in an Islamist state like that. So my theory is just do absolutely nothing is the shortest distance between here and the fall of the caliph. But I wonder if you think that's just my kind of own confirmation bias there, or you think that may be right?
I agree. And I agree with your assessment. The one thing I would say that twerks that assessment a bit is if you look at, say, the Taliban, very similar prior to 9/11 in Afghanistan, and what kept them in power and what was the main cause, in my opinion, of their rapid demise was the Pakistani government. And in 2001, after 9/11, when we invaded Afghanistan, the Pakistanis pulled their over support for the Afghan Taliban. You saw how quickly they crumbled once they stopped receiving Pakistani rupees. The same thing I believe in Islamic State will occur if you get the Saudis and the Qataris and the other Gulf states to stop supporting them. Because I agree with your assessment. They're surrounded by enemies. They have no market. They have no economy. And they're a terrible, horrible organization that will fail as long as they're not propped up from the outside. So we should do nothing, and we should ensure that in the same way that we're not, nudge, nudge, wink, wink to the Saudis and the Qataris to continue supporting them.
Yeah, the Turks. And really, I don't know exactly how much influence they have, but it seems like if the American government was really serious, no, I'm really serious, stop financing these guys, I mean it, they would stop, right? They've had a wink and a nudge this whole time at least, haven't they?
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing, will it?
Yeah.
But, and this is stuff we can get into when you start getting into the relationship between the Saudi royal family and our political leadership and the Saudi royal family and our CIA director. You wonder about those things. Would they actually do it? So.
Yep. Well, and the Israelis have made it clear all along, too, that they prefer at least unending low-level warfare, if not outright regime change in Damascus. So.
Absolutely, yeah.
Stated that on the record, and that's, they were, I think, pushing a lot harder than the Saudis a year ago for the airstrikes against Assad under the chemical weapons scam there. All right. Well, anyway, I've kept you over time, but thanks very much for your time. Good to talk to you again, Matthew.
You bet, Scott. You have a good one.
Appreciate you, too. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here. I want to tell you about this great new book, Livin' La Vida Barocca, American Culture in an Age of Imperial Orthodoxies by Thomas Harrington. While he comes from the left, Harrington has little time for much of what is passed off under that label today. Like us libertarians, he puts peace and freedom first. The book's got great essays on American fascism, empire, the Israeli occupation, the left and Obama, liberalism in the state, and some interesting lessons from the history of Imperial Spain. Livin' La Vida Barocca by Thomas Harrington. Check it out at scotthorton.org/books or scotthorton.org/Amazon. Hey, y'all, Scott here for Whole Food Multi-Complete at WholeFoodComplete.com. Whole Food Multi-Complete is an entire supplement program in one bottle containing 100% RDA of vitamins and minerals, plus live probiotics, digestive enzymes, antioxidant herbs, energy nutrients, and more. It's made in America using real foods and live probiotics. No chemical synthetics. It's soy-free, gluten-free, and independently tested and verified. They're so sure you'll love it, they're taking 20% off your first order with coupon code Scott Horton. Satisfaction is guaranteed at WholeFoodComplete.com. Hey, y'all, Scott here. So you made a little bit of money in this horrid economy only to find that the Fed has more or less outlawed saving. So into the treacherous waters of the stock market bubble you go. But how to make a little money without too much risk of losing it all? Check out WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson is a successful former hedge fund manager who opens a very real window into his main account, updating his subscribers on the facts of and the reasoning behind all his market moves. Follow along on paper or with real money and see what happens at WallStreetWindow.com. What was the only interest group in D.C. pushing war with Syria last summer? AIPAC and the Israel lobby. What's the only interest group in D.C. pushing to sabotage the nuclear deal with Iran right now? AIPAC and the Israel lobby. Why doesn't the president force an end to the occupation of Palestine, a leading cause of terrorist attacks against the United States? AIPAC and the Israel lobby. The Council for the National Interest is pushing back, putting America first and educating the people about what's really at stake in the Middle East. Help support their important work at councilforthenationalinterest.org.